Hello, everyone. Welcome in. Come in, pull up a chair. This is going to be probably a pretty long video, but I'm here for this journey. I think it'll be fun. But so what this video is it's going to be my reading vlog for the Harry Potter series. So basically what that means is it's just a reading vlog. It's my journey going through the whole series, reading the series, checking in every once in a while and just letting my thoughts out on, whatever's catching my attention. And this isn't necessarily a review or an analysis video of the series. I feel like it's more casual than that. It's kind of just checking in whenever there's something interesting that I want to talk about. I want to get into a few things that this video definitely isn't, because I know that on BookTube or just review videos, there's kind of these expectations of what type of format I might be following or what the whole point of this is. So this video is not a breakdown of J.K. Rowling's wrongdoings or a breakdown of the problematic things that are in the book. I don't have the capability to do that. I don't have the knowledge, I don't have the experience, any of that. And also I'm just going for more of a lighthearted thing with this whole journey. This video also isn't a breakdown of all of the plot holes in the series. Again, I don't have the knowledge for that either. I feel like you would need to read through many, many, many times to catch everything. And this also is not a breakdown of the differences or comparing the movie and the book. And of course, any and all of those might come up at times, but overall, it's not pointing out all of the plot holes or pointing out all of the differences between the movie and the book. It's just kind of here and there, interesting things or emotions that I'm feeling as I read on with the series. So I want to get into why am I doing this video. I think I've been on BookTube a long time, lurking. I haven't really done any videos on books, but I've been lurking on BookTube for a while, and I really like watching reading vlogs because I think it's a fun way to report back on the book. It's something that's just more exciting than a review, either written or a video review. I think the vlog is just a good way it's an interesting way to kind of see the journey and the progression throughout, and when these emotions started coming into play, and kind of pointing out maybe different plot things that happened along the way that kind of led to those feelings. And I think it's easier to catch on to those specific details when you're doing it in vlog format rather than waiting to do a review at the end after the fact and kind of trying to pick up all the pieces of, I think around here is where I started to lose interest. I also think that the reading vlog format it's just more exciting for fellow readers that have read the book to follow along, because you'll be able to recognize if you've read it that, once I get to chapter 5, I'll kind of explain what happened up to this point, and you'll be able to say, oh, okay, yeah, I really like that part, or like, yeah, that's where it started to get really bad. So I think it's kind of more interesting for the fellow readers to follow along with the vlog. Now, let's talk about Harry Potter more specifically. I think Harry Potter, I have kind of an interesting perspective on this series that I personally think is unusual. I haven't really seen many other people with this experience. And of course, I mean, at this point, there's probably billions of people who have read these books. So, I mean, none of these experiences are unique. I'm sure someone has probably done this. There's probably a lot of people that have my same exact experience, but I don't think it's typical. So I thought it was just something that would be interesting to document. But so my perspective is I'm someone who has read the books, but I've read them once, and I was extremely young, and I read them before I watched the movie. I've watched the movies hundreds of times probably at this point, and I've never gone back and revisited the books, and I remember almost nothing from the books. So I don't know. I think that's kind of an interesting perspective. Maybe it's not. Maybe that's, I'm sure a lot of people have experienced that or have friends or whatever that that's the case, but I feel like most of the people in the Harry Potter fandom are people who have either they've watched the movies and they love the movies but they've never read the books, or they're people that have read the books and watched the movies but they've read the books multiple times and they know it really well, or they've read it recently so they know it really well. I want to be able to do this for a lot of other types of books or a lot of other book series, but the reason why I wanted to start with Harry Potter, or another reason why I wanted to start with Harry Potter, is because I want to read Cursed Child, which I haven't done before, and I've avoided spoilers for that for so long, and I finally want to know what it's all about. So, and I can't really jump into Cursed Child. I feel like I need to refresh myself on the books and on everything that happens there before I can jump into Cursed Child. So that's why I'm reading the whole series again. And I also just want to know whether the books hold up, like whether they're good or which ones I prefer, if I prefer the books or the movies. So now for some various other disclaimers. One, I'm not really sure how I'm going to segment this video, if I'm going to do each book as one video or if I'm going to do the whole series as one video, but we'll see. One thing that's really important is there will definitely be spoilers throughout this whole video. There's not going to be any non-spoiler section, and the spoiler section is just all spoilers. And I think that the intention for this video is for people who have already read the book. I think that's why reading vlogs are interesting, is it's almost like a way of buddy reading with someone. So again, this video is for people who've read the books, so there's definitely going to be spoilers the whole time. I also just wanted to add a disclaimer that I'm definitely not an expert on the books or the movies. It's been kind of a while since I've seen the movies, but I used to watch them all the time. So I'm sure I'm going to get a bunch of stuff wrong, so definitely take it easy on me, please. I'm doing my best. The video is me knitting a Harry Potter related pattern. I'm a Ravenclaw, so it's Ravenclaw colors. I'm using the movie colors because I like those better. And I'm not going to be fast forwarding really at all or showing you the whole process of making this piece. It's just a casual little thing to put in the background while I talk. And I'll put the knitting pattern in the description. And one last disclaimer is, again, this is all going to be my opinion. Don't attack people, be nice. It's my opinion. You have an opinion. We can have different opinions. Just be respectful and nice, and that's what I have to say on that. Yeah, so that's it for all of the lead up to this video, the reason why I'm doing it, what I'm doing, all of my disclaimers. I just want this to be kind of a lighthearted, fun recounting of this children's book series. So without further ado, I'm going to start reading now, and I'll check in with you again probably at 25%, maybe somewhere around there. So I'll see you then. Hello, I'm back for my first check-in for the first Harry Potter book. I'm currently 28% through, which equates to page 92 on the ebook. So before we get into my thoughts, I wanted to give a really, really brief plot summary about what I've read so far and where I left off. That way you know what I'm commenting on. And again, I'm assuming that you've already read the book, so spoilers are ahead, of course. But so what I've read so far is we meet the Dursleys. Harry is dropped off to live with them after his parents are killed. He has a terrible life with them. The Hogwarts letters start to come, and then, of course, the Dursleys try to hide the letters from Harry, but it doesn't work because then Hagrid comes to hand deliver Harry's Hogwarts letter, and then Hagrid takes Harry to Diagon Alley to get things for school. And the next chapter is called The Journey from Platform 9 3/4, so once I jump back into the book, it's going to be taking the train to Hogwarts and getting more into the magic aspect of the story. So now we'll get into some of my thoughts on the book so far. I think one thing that has been interesting for me so far is the similarity between the books and the movies, or rather the first book and the first movie. They're really similar so far. There's very little difference. It's pretty much been the same so far. There have only been very slight differences between the book and the movie, and those differences have been pretty unimportant. I think the movie did a really good job of choosing which bits to leave out that don't really matter to the overall story. I think maybe the biggest difference that I've picked up on is the difference in the whimsical tone. I think the book has more of a classical, stereotypical descriptions of witches and wizards and magic. Like, for example, they describe Dumbledore as wearing these purple robes and having these heeled boots with buckles, which is just more of a classical interpretation of witches and wizards versus what they end up doing in the movie, which is kind of more muted colors and a little bit more modern take on that. Another example is the Hogwarts letter says that Harry needs to buy a pointed hat to wear at school, which I'm just really glad that the movie dropped that because I think it would have looked way too silly. I do have a correction. The hats are in the movies. I was watching a clip and I noticed that the background characters are wearing the wizard hats. I don't know if Harry or any of the main characters really do. For some reason, this is Mandela affected out of my mind. I don't really remember this being the case, but yeah, apparently there were hats in the movies. I do think that they taper off. I don't think the later movies really have the hats. Anyways, that was just a correction I wanted to make really quick. Along with the whimsical tone of the book, I thought that there were some really funny lines, especially describing the Dursleys. I want to read just a few of my favorite lines that were pretty funny. So there's this line describing the Dursleys. He was a big, beefy man with hardly any neck, although he did have a very large mustache. Mrs. Dursley was thin and blonde and had nearly twice the usual amount of neck. That's from the very first page. But so stuff like that gives more of a whimsical, almost Dr. Seuss type of writing style, which I do like. I think it's funny, but also at the same time, it does make it feel more childish. So there's obviously, I think, kind of a bit of a tone shift from the book to the movie. The book is more childish and it's more almost Dr. Seuss or Cat in the Hat-ish with the humor and the way the writing style is. And it's definitely a preference. I prefer more of the movie tone where it's more mature, a little bit darker. And I'm enjoying it for what it is, too. I do think it's funny. Another line I liked about the Dursleys was, he hurried to his car and set off for home, hoping he was imagining things, which he had never hoped before because he didn't approve of imagination. Another thing I'm really enjoying about the book is seeing exact lines that were taken directly from the book and used in the movie. There are lines or even monologues at certain points that feel like they're translated exactly. And it's just really entertaining that I can kind of picture exactly in my head the actor saying it and the way they said it and the expression on their face. So some of those moments that I wanted to point out were, and I'm not an impressionist, so I'm not going to even try to sound like the actors, but just know I can kind of hear it in my head. But so here were some lines that I picked up on being really similar from the book to the movie. 36, he said, looking up at his mother and father. That's 2 less than last year.
36, but last year I had 37!
Or this part, no post on Sundays, he reminded them cheerfully. And that one's just so good because you know what's going to happen. He's all happy that his plan finally worked, and of course it doesn't. The letters still are delivered that day, so it's just a really good moment. Or this line, but he had finally gone too far. Hagrid seized his umbrella and whirled it over his head. Never, he thundered, insult Albus Dumbledore in front of me.
Never insult Albus Dumbledore in front of me.
And I think a lot of these lines, they are exactly the same, but also the tone in the movie is exactly the same. The tone and the character are exactly as intended in the book, because I do know some specific lines later on that translate lines directly, but the tone is completely off. So, at least so far, the movie has been very faithful to the book. And just another thing that I thought was really interesting was the iconic line in the movie, "You're a wizard, Harry." In the book, it's, "Harry, you're a wizard." And I just think it's really funny that it's slightly off. And the movie version sounds a lot better, I think. But it's just interesting to see how that, I guess it's syntax. I think it's interesting to see how the word order was switched around, and it does make a pretty significant impact, I think. One thing I'm picking up on about Harry so far is he's a little bit more cheeky. He's a little bit more mischievous in the books. I think in the movies, at least from how I'm remembering it, I think he's a little bit more one note. He's more of a bravery is kind of his one character trait. And in the book, I think we get to see him have a little bit of a funner, more lighthearted time with things. And I wanted to read some specific lines about this, showing Harry being a little bit more playful in the books. So Harry's talking to Dudley about their new schools that they're going to, and Dudley is kind of threatening Harry that he's gonna put his head down the toilet. And so Dudley asks Harry, "Want to come upstairs and practice?" "No thanks," said Harry. "The poor toilet's never had anything as horrible as your head down it. It might be sick." Then he ran before Dudley could work out what he'd said. And another moment that I really liked was about the Hogwarts letters that keep coming. They heard the click of the mail slot and flop of letters on the doormat. "Get the mail, Dudley," said Uncle Vernon from behind his paper. "Make Harry get it." "Get the mail, Harry." "Make Dudley get it." "Poke him with your smelting stick, Dudley." Harry dodged the smelting stick and went to get the mail. So stuff like that I just think is really funny. Harry having a bit of fun with his situation, which I don't think we really get to see much of in the movies, at least from what I remember. So this whole intro section, it's been about 100 pages, and it's been full of bangers, one after the other. It's when Harry gets dropped off, and then we meet the Dursleys, and then it's the vanishing glass scene, and then it's the letters, and then it's Diagon Alley, and so it's kind of banger one after the other, but yet I'm still really eager to get into the magic bits and get more into Hogwarts and the mystery and that kind of thing. We've met Malfoy so far, and I just love him already. It's so easy to hate him, just how snobby and spoiled he is and out of touch. But so I just love him so far. But we haven't met any of the other main characters, really. We haven't really met Dumbledore. We got a little sneak peek, but that was it. And we haven't met Hermione or Ron or any of the other classmates he has, or any of the other teachers, Snape and all of that. So I'm excited to get into that. Next, I wanted to get into some plot hole type of things that I've picked up on. And I don't know if they're necessarily plot holes, but it's just stuff that doesn't really make sense to me. Especially knowing what happens later on in the series, it's just some stuff isn't quite matching up, or the logic just isn't really making sense. So one question that I started to have while I was reading this was, why did Dumbledore leave Harry with the Dursleys? It doesn't really make sense to me at all. Dumbledore does say that he thinks that that would be better for Harry because he won't be famous and he won't know that he's famous and he won't let it get to his head if he doesn't know. So that's what they give us as for the rationale for why they did that. And I do see that argument, but overall, I don't think that really makes sense. First of all, I just think it's really unsafe for Harry to be left with the Dursleys. I mean, first of all, they aren't treating him well. They're treating him like the ugly stepson, the ugly redheaded stepson. And also, they're not going to be, Harry is the most prized, famous wizard of his generation, basically, and you're just going to leave him with this non-magic family that has no idea who Voldemort is and won't be able to protect him from anything. The logic isn't really adding up for me. I think the priority would be to keep him safe versus him having a little bit of an ego. I also think that it just puts him at a really big disadvantage to not even know that magic exists. It's kind of a whole new language and culture that he's going to have to learn and adjust to. And for someone, they think that he's going to be this great wizard, and I think that's already kind of putting him at an extreme disadvantage. But I do see that maybe that's where he gets a lot of his bravery from, is having to stand up for himself against the Dursleys and having to go up against this oppression for all of his life and keeping him down to earth. So I do think it makes sense for the narrative, like it makes sense for how that experience shapes Harry into who he is later in the books and where he needs to be to meet certain friends and whatever, but I guess what I'm saying is that I think it's unrealistic, which I know it's a story about magic and witches and wizards and werewolves and whatever, but if this was real, I just don't think it would make sense to leave Harry with a bunch of people that don't care about him, can't protect him. I don't like that. Also, one thing that I've picked up on is Hagrid using magic, and there's a couple of things that don't add up for me. There's a couple points that he makes about magic that just don't hold up. Like he says, "Oh, you're not supposed to use magic outside of Hogwarts except for very extreme circumstances." And of course, we know later on Harry is put in pretty much an emergency situation and has to do magic outside of school, and he gets in really big trouble for it. So there's kind of stuff like that don't really add up. I don't think J.K. Rowling really knew where she was going to go with the series later on down the line. And that's pretty minor so far, but, just something that I picked up on. Also, I think it's really sketchy that I guess I never thought that Hagrid doesn't really use magic. I kind of just always thought of him as this authority figure, and of course he uses magic, but I guess he doesn't ever really do that, which is kind of an interesting shock to my system. But also, I think it's really sketchy that he is using magic, and Dumbledore, I guess, just lets him get away with it. So there's definitely some clear favoritism going on that he's... I mean, we love Hagrid, of course, but it's not adding up. How is he allowed to do this without consequences? And of course, like in the beginning with the vanishing glass type of stuff, and there's a couple of other anecdotes about Harry getting haircuts he didn't like so his hair would grow magically fast. Stuff like that I don't think matches with how magic is used later on in the series. It's not really something that you can just make up as you go along kind of thing. And of course, some of this stuff might be explained later on, but at least, and I'm not an expert in the movies or obviously the books, so I could be missing stuff, but these are just some of the things that I've noticed. Another big thing that I wanted to talk about was the wand scene when Harry goes to Ollivander's and he gets to choose his wand chooses him. First, let me read you the passage in the book. Harry took the wand. He felt a sudden warmth in his fingers. He raised the wand above his head, brought it swishing down through the dusty air, and a stream of red and gold sparks shot from the end like a firework, throwing dancing spots of light onto the walls. Hagrid whooped and clapped, and Mr. Ollivander cried, "Oh, bravo! Yes, indeed! Oh, very good! Well, well, well! How curious! How very curious!" So for me, the book, talking about this scene, this epic scene of the wand choosing Harry, it does not compare to the movie in any way. And part of that might be just the book is obviously for children and it's more childish and whimsical and it's not deep. But I prefer the movie 100 times over when talking about this scene specifically, because just the magic of it all, the wind blowing in his face, the music, it's all ties together into such an epic, iconic scene in the franchise. So stuff like that just makes me think, I don't know, that there's not really a point to reading the book when the movie does it so much better. For me, in my opinion so far. But of course, I'm literally only 28% into the first book. So, I mean, we'll see how that progresses as I go on. But that's pretty much it. That's all I have so far. I'll check in again, probably around the 50% mark, maybe more or maybe less, depending on how much there is to talk about. So I'll see you then. Hello, I'm back for my second check-in for Harry Potter and the Sorcerer's Stone. This time I read through chapters 6 through 9. I left off on page 175 of the ebook, and I'm at 51% right now. So this time I'm covering less chapters than I did. There's less material, but I still have a lot to talk about. So first, I'll just give you a little idea of what I've read over the past 4 chapters. So Harry and all of his classmates, they take the train to Hogwarts, and Harry meets everyone and he gets sorted into Gryffindor. He starts all of his classes. He gets into that one fight with Malfoy, which ends up putting him on the Quidditch team. And various hijinks and rivalries ensue. So when I pick the book up again, I'm going to be at the point where it's Halloween and then they run into the troll. So first, let's start with some of my overall thoughts on these last couple of chapters. I'm happy to be back at Hogwarts, or, there for the first time and learning about the culture, and it sounds weird to say culture, but you know what I mean. And just meeting all of his classmates and all of the teachers and all of the spells and that kind of thing. So I'm glad to kind of be getting into that more. I do think I'm a little bit bored though, because the book has been pretty much exactly like the movie. There's been very, very minor differences so far. Like, there's a scene where they get locked out of the common room and they wander through the halls, and then they end up running into Fluffy. And that's how they discover that the dog is there. And in the movie, I think it is just the main 3, Harry, Ron, and Hermione, but the book has Neville also in the group. So it's just kind of minor things like that that have been different. So it's been a little boring, to be honest, just because I'm not really getting any new information that I didn't already know. I think it's also taking a little bit longer than I thought to get into kind of the main mystery with Voldemort and the Sorcerer's Stone and that kind of thing. It happened on literally the last page of this section where they start tying it into those mysteries and those questions. And I do think it's a little bit overwhelming too once they get to Hogwarts, it's so many names that they throw at you of different spells and different historical figures and all of the classmates and all of the teachers. It's obviously not as bad for me because I know the movie pretty well, so I know all of the characters in advance, but if I didn't know all of the characters already, I do think it would be really confusing and hard to follow. So that's it for my general thoughts. I'll get into some specific details now that I wanted to talk about. So, continuing on, one of my thoughts that I had in the last check in, I was kind of speculating about how Dumbledore leaves Harry with the Dursleys and how I don't think that really makes sense. I don't think it makes sense. Like, if it was real life, it doesn't seem safe, it doesn't seem like a good idea, but it obviously makes sense for the character development and how they interact and what happens to Harry over the course of the story. And that's kind of coming together a little bit more. I think Harry growing up with the Dursleys helps him form a relationship with Ron and Hermione a lot better. For Ron, I think he's able to relate to him because he was poor living with the Dursleys. He only got hand-me-downs and that kind of thing. So he is on the same playing field as Ron. And then similarly to Hermione as well, he's basically coming from a non-magic family and having this culture shock and adjustment, and he's basically a mudblood also. So I'm seeing that, I'm putting the pieces together for how that decision makes sense for Harry's character development and his relationships that form. And obviously that also fuels his hatred for Malfoy as well, because the Dursleys are that same type of snobby, rich personality. So it makes sense why he hates Malfoy as well. I also wanted to continue on another thought that I talked about during the last check-in, which was kind of some stuff not making sense with magic, using magic outside of Hogwarts. Again, when they're on the train to Hogwarts, Hermione is doing magic on the train. I'll give you that one. Maybe that's allowed, but it's a little questionable. But she also talks about trying magic at home before she left for Hogwarts. So just some little things like that where it's like you can tell that J.K. Rowling didn't really have the foresight of exactly where she wanted to go with it. It's minor, but just, another thing I wanted to point out. Another interesting thing about the book so far is that Hermione isn't part of the core group, which is really weird. It's just Harry and Ron, and then there's various people from Gryffindor that they interact with. Fred and George and Neville and Seamus and Dean, and Hermione is one of those side characters. So I just think it's kind of interesting because the movie shows it as them, the three of them, being inseparable from pretty much the beginning. But in the books, it's kind of taking a little bit longer than I thought for that progression to happen. I think what we've seen from the characters has also been pretty surface level so far. There's just been way too many that we can't really get any depth with them yet, I don't think. And also it's a children's book, so it's probably not, going to be that deep. But so it's been pretty surface level, but I did really, really love the bits of Mrs. Weasley that we got to see when she's kind of helping Harry at the train station trying to get to platform 9 3/4. She was just so sweet to Harry, so I really liked that part. And I'm also just loving some of the mischievous bits from Fred and George, of course. Also, Peeves is a character that's not in the movie, and I've been having some fun with him in the books. I don't think he's major enough to be in the movie. I think they made the right decision. That would have been maybe too many characters, but I do think it's fun to run into Peeves every once in a while in the books and just run into his chaos and attitude and all that. Okay, so a big thing that I wanted to talk about is the houses and the sorting. I feel like I have, especially recently, just had a big problem with this, and I'm sure it's going to come up more and more as I continue with the books, and I'll have points come up that I want to talk about. But it's starting to annoy me a little bit. So the one thing that just keeps popping up so far about this whole houses and sorting topic is Slytherin. There's such vilification against Slytherins, and it's so weird. Like, it's obviously it has to be very black and white. It's Gryffindors are good and Slytherins are bad. There needs to be this ultimate villain and the hero for us to root for. And I really love the idea of the houses and, having this family and this group of people that you identify with, and you're all really similar, and just the camaraderie and the team spirit and getting house points and competitions and that kind of thing. I really enjoy all of that, and I love all of the team mascots and the team colors and all of that stuff. I love that culture. And I love the idea of sorting yourself or sorting everyone into these different characteristics, but kind of the closer you look at it, the more it starts to fall apart for me. I get it that, first of all, it's a children's book, so I'm trying to keep that in mind. Like, of course, they're going to group this group as the big bad, but I just think it's so unfair that this whole house is treated like the worst thing ever, and literally everyone in that house must be bad, and oh, I hope I get any house but Slytherin. It's a little bit dramatic and unnecessary. Like, it's all just very black and white. It's everyone from Gryffindor is good and everyone from Slytherin is bad. And there's even a line that Hagrid says that I think it was in the previous section, but he says, "There's never been a bad wizard that came from a house other than Slytherin," which we know is not true. But so it's just this black and white of like everyone in Slytherin is bad, and every bad wizard ever has come from Slytherin that I don't like, and it's coming from Hagrid, like an authority figure. And it also comes from the Sorting Hat, which also is kind of an objective figure that is still saying that Slytherin is a bad house. It's just kind of weird. It sounds like I'm getting like super offended. I'm not offended, obviously. It's just, it doesn't make sense to me. I don't know. It makes sense like for, I guess, a children's story, just you need to have the villain, but I just don't really like it. I don't know. Okay, so let me read a portion of the Sorting Hat's poem that he recites before he starts sorting everyone. So he's reading off this poem of all of these characteristics from each of the different houses, and this is what he says for Slytherin. "Or perhaps in Slytherin you'll make your real friends. Those cunning folk use any means to achieve their ends." Like, why does it have to be so negative for Slytherin all the time? They're just so vilified for not just existing. And why is ambition such a bad thing anyway? It really doesn't make sense to me at all. Hi, I'm back. I had to cut my last check-in a little bit short, so sorry if the audio is a little different, but I'm gonna keep going where I left off. So another thing I wanted to talk about was, it's something that's always kind of stuck out in my mind is I just think it's funny that there's all of these British things and slang, and specifically for food probably, that always sound so exotic, like pumpkin pasty and treacle tarts and all of those things. And it's kind of funny that being as a non-British person, I really can't tell if that's a magic thing or if it's a British thing. It sounds equally as magical and far away to me, but I guess an interesting perspective, I feel, for British readers versus non-British readers. Another thing I wanted to talk about was I like how, again, it's been kind of a consistent thing that the book has been really similar to the movie so far, but specifically one thing that I've started to notice is that even the dialects of some of the characters or their accents have been completely spot on. So I just think that's really cool that the movie is so specific and so detail oriented that even the accents translate exactly the same. So let me show an example quote of this. "I'm half and half," said Seamus. "Me dad's a muggle. Mum didn't tell him she was a witch till after they were married. Bit of a nasty shock for him."
I'm half and half. My dad's a muggle. Mum's a witch.
This is also the section where I got to one of, if not the most iconic line of the whole series. "We could have all been killed, or worse, expelled." So of course that was just great to come across that iconic line. And then one last topic that I want to touch on before I go is a little bit of a bigger topic, and I'm sure it's going to keep coming up as we move along with this whole reading journey. But this has to do with kind of the favoritism of Harry, is what I would call it. I am just seeing it from a different perspective, I think, reading it now as an adult. I think reading it as a child, I and probably a lot of other people saw myself as Harry and, dreaming of what it would be like to be famous all of a sudden and be in this magical, interesting world with all of these friends and all of these new abilities and this whole new world of possibilities. So reading it as a child, I think I put myself in Harry's shoes, and this very optimistic point of view versus now as an adult when I'm reading it, I feel like I'm picking up on all of these things. I think I have more of a pessimistic point of view now that I'm an adult. So I'm kind of just seeing like all of the ways that they're treating Harry, and it's like, this is some favoritism going on. And then same thing with Hagrid. It's like, I don't know how he keeps getting away with these things just because people like him. But, and it's kind of sad that that's my perspective now a little bit. But I'm deconstructing it, and I think it makes sense just as you grow older that you're going to take a more critical view on stuff like this. And it's not like a huge thing. I'm not saying I hate Harry or he's annoying or whatever, but it's just kind of an interesting opposite perspective of what I had when I was younger when I was reading these. Because when I was younger, it's like, oh, Harry and by extension me, we're special. So we get to have all of these special privileges afforded to us. And then reading it now, it's more like Harry should not get more privileges than everyone else. So it's just kind of interesting. And I'll read one specific quote that kind of exemplified this for me. So this is after Harry kind of fights with Malfoy on the brooms. They're flying and Malfoy steals the Remembrall, that whole scene, and then McGonagall takes Harry away and Harry thinks he's going to be expelled and get in trouble. And then McGonagall is actually like, "Oh wow, you're actually really good at flying. Like you should join the Quidditch team." So this is what McGonagall says. "I shall speak to Professor Dumbledore and see if we can't bend the first year rule." Why are we bending the rule for Harry? I don't... Because he's good? I'm sure there's a lot of other first years that have been good, but why does Harry get the rules bent for him? I'm not exactly sure why that rule's in place. Like, maybe it's because it's dangerous, or maybe it's because first years are supposed to be focusing on their studies. I don't really remember what the purpose of that rule was, but there was a reason why it was there. And just because Harry's good, he can just get away with it, along with probably a lot of other stuff that happens down the line in this series. So, yeah, that's it. So I'll check in again for my third check-in, which should be around the 75% mark. So I'll see you then. Hello, I'm back for my third check-in. This is covering chapters 10 through 14. I left off on page 260 of the ebook, which means I'm about 75% through the book. So first I'll give a little plot summary of what I've read over the past quarter of the book. So there was the whole troll scene where they find the troll and then they fight it or whatever. Harry had his first Quidditch match where his broom is bewitched. Harry and Ron spend Christmas at Hogwarts. Harry finds the mirror of Erzed. Hopefully I'm saying that right. They do research on Nicholas Flamel, and Hagrid gets the dragon. So that's all just a pretty brief overview of what happened over the last 90 pages or so. And when I pick the book back up, it's going to be getting into the Forbidden Forest detention storyline. Okay, so my overall thoughts. I think right now I'm a little bit bored, to be honest. I think, and I've said this the whole time, I think it's just so similar to the movie. But so I'm a little bit bored. It's not necessarily a criticism on the book itself, it's more just there isn't really a point for me to read the book, it feels like, since I already know everything that's going to happen. And I'll probably dive more into that whole discussion at the end of this vlog once I finish the book. But I also just don't have much to say in this section, this part 3, because I just don't have many thoughts because it's so similar to the movie. I think parts 2 and 3, so this kind of middle chunk, the 25 to 75% range, have been really similar to me in the book. It's very standard. It's kind of just general castle magic-y stuff, meeting friends and going to classes kind of thing. I am excited though to get to the end of the book and get to all of the Sorcerer's Stone trials where they go through the devil's snare and all that kind of stuff. I am excited to get there. But so just a few things that I wanted to talk about. It's a really short list this time. So this is a follow-up to the sorting / house issue. And I have a feeling that this is going to come up continually every time I find a character that doesn't seem to belong in the house that they were sorted in. But this is the first one I'm going to start with. Hermione. I think when I was younger, I was kind of just gaslit into believing that she should be a Gryffindor, but I think reading it now, I can see for myself that she definitely should have been a Ravenclaw. I mean, her one characteristic is basically being smart and very studious, so it makes absolutely no sense that she should be in Gryffindor, at least so far. And here's one scene specifically that was kind of the final straw for me. So this is in the whole troll scene where Harry and Ron have to go rescue Hermione. Flushed with their victory, they started to run back up the passage, but as they reached the corner, they heard something that made their hearts stop. A high, petrified scream, and it was coming from the chamber they'd just chained up. "Oh no," said Ron, pale as the Bloody Baron. "It's the girls' bathroom," Harry gasped. "Hermione," they said together. It was the last thing they wanted to do, but what choice did they have? Wheeling around, they sprinted back to the door and turned the key, fumbling in their panic. Harry pulled the door open and they ran inside. Hermione Granger was shrinking against the wall opposite, looking as if she was about to faint. The troll was advancing on her, knocking the sinks off the wall as it went. So in that whole passage, Hermione is very much damsel in distress. Harry and Ron save her. And of course, it's not really like anything that I'm shaming her for or anything like that. I mean, she's like an 11-year-old girl that just randomly had a troll come up to her in the bathroom. So, I mean, it's completely reasonable for her to be scared and all of that, but she doesn't help at all throughout this whole fight. Harry and Ron come save her. She's kind of cowering in the corner. Again, totally reasonable, but I just wouldn't say that courage or bravery is her first attribute. That's not her main attribute. Her main characteristic is being smart. And yeah, she probably does grow into her bravery as the series moves on. But in the meantime, she's not really brave. And the Sorting Hat read her at 11 years old, where her main attribute was being smart. So to me, it obviously makes a lot more sense that she would be in Ravenclaw. Also, another minor thing that I wanted to talk about was I'm just kind of enjoying their relationship with Hagrid. How Hagrid is always checking in on them and inviting them for tea. So I just like how warm he is and how much of an effort he puts into having this relationship with the kids. And even though he's definitely a bit of a screw up, he's just so funny about it, the way they can kind of get little pieces of information or gossip out of him. So that's it for this part. The next time I check in, I will probably be done with the book, so I'll probably have more things to say then. So I'll talk to you then. Hello, I'm here with my last check-in for Harry Potter and the Sorcerer's Stone. So I'm finished. I'm 100% page 333 out of 333. That's for the ebook. So this last quarter, what I read was it picked up in the Forbidden Forest bit. They do all of their final exams. They go after the stone. They do all of the tests to get to the stone. Harry makes it to the end and he finds Quirrell with Voldemort on the back of his head. Harry gets the stone, but he doesn't give it to Voldemort and they fight, but he passes out. And then Dumbledore comes to the rescue. And then they get all of the extra house points and Gryffindor wins the House Cup and they all go home for the summer. Happy ending. So overall, my thoughts have definitely been consistently, it's so similar to the movie that what's the point in reading it really? And I'll dig into that more later, but that's kind of been consistently my thoughts throughout this whole time that I've been reading it. This section specifically, this last quarter, felt really rushed to me. I definitely would have liked it if the mystery was strung out a little bit longer throughout the whole book, or at least, the whole second half, rather than mostly being focused at the end quarter. Some specific points that I wanted to talk about was, for one, the house colors and the mascots aren't really talked about yet. There's been some really brief descriptions, but it's kind of blink and you'll miss it. At the very end, when they're awarding the house points and everything, they talk about Slytherin and Gryffindor's mascots and the colors, but I think that's the only time they mention it, really. And then also, in the beginning, when Harry's getting the Hogwarts letters, it briefly talks about the Hogwarts logo with, like, the shield and the 4 mascots, but that's, from what I noticed, those were the only times that they talked about that. So I just thought that was interesting that that hasn't really been solidified yet, or it's not as important to the culture, I guess, or the aesthetic as it is in the movies or maybe in the later books. Another interesting thing that I've noticed throughout reading this book is that it almost shows the core group as a foursome versus a threesome. And I'm talking about including Neville. The book includes Neville in a lot more of these important scenes, and like Neville is one of the people that gets detention and has to go into the Forbidden Forest, and also just Neville is included in various adventures with the group, and then he's of course one of the people that's awarded extra points at the end of the year as well. Another thing is there wasn't really much interaction with Quirrell at all, which was a little bit odd. Other than Harry talking to him at the very beginning at Diagon Alley, there wasn't really much interaction between them at all. So obviously it would have been better for me if they had interacted more, because then the twist that Quirrell's the villain would be much more powerful. Another thing is I'm kind of having a new perspective on Hagrid that I didn't have before. I of course love him, he's really sweet, but the more I would read the book, the more I could see kind of some of his flaws. And again, we love him, he's sweet, but I would not necessarily feel protected and safe or just trust him really at all. I think he's more of a liability than an asset, at least during this first book. So take this scene specifically. I'm going to read a quote from when they're doing detention and they have to go into the Forbidden Forest with Hagrid. "There's nothing that lives in the forest that'll hurt you if you're with me or Fang," said Hagrid. And I was kind of just thinking about that, and I'm like, I mean, obviously we know as we read on that the forest is full of scary things. I mean, Harry has this interaction with Voldemort there, so obviously it is dangerous, but also I would not feel protected with Hagrid. Like, I think when I was younger, I always just saw him as kind of this authority figure. But reading it this time, I just see how much he messes up and how he doesn't have magic and how he was expelled and all of that. So if I was in the forest with just Hagrid and a bunch of other first years, I would not feel safe at all. He is a big, giant dude. He's probably really strong and all, but he's a little bit out of his depth in a magical world, I would say. But also, he just has really loose lips. He's kind of the whole reason why Quirrell slash Voldemort was able to break into the stone area, because they were able to just trick him by giving him the dragon and getting him drunk so that they could get information about Fluffy. And also just the whole dragon scene in general. Harry and Ron and Hermione have to fix Hagrid's problem of getting an illegal dragon. There's a bunch of first years that have to find a way to get rid of the dragon. And they're the ones that are thinking rationally, like, this is really bad that he has a dragon. He lives in a wooden house. He's going to get in a lot of trouble. And then they're the ones that have to fix the problem. So it's kind of just a lot of stuff like that where Hagrid is definitely more of a liability. But obviously he has his lovable moments. Like, I really liked the end where he gave Harry the photo album of his parents, because something that was kind of interesting in the book was when Harry sees his parents in the mirror of Erised, he doesn't even recognize that it's his parents. It takes him a while to be like, oh, they have the same eyes as me. So it's just really sad that he is so disconnected from his parents that he doesn't even know what they look like. That's kind of crazy to me. So that made it more powerful when Hagrid gave him the photo album, because Harry had no idea really of what his parents looked like. So that was just a really sweet moment. Okay, so now I want to get into the trials. That's what I'm calling it. All of those little tests that they have to do before getting to the stone. I do really love the trials at the end, the mechanism, how Dumbledore is away so that the group has to take matters into their own hands, how they all work together and they all have their own areas of expertise that allow them to move forward and pass all of the tests. And I think this scene, or this group of scenes, is a really good example of how the book focuses mostly on plot versus writing, characters, ambiance, anything else, because the trials are covered so fast. It felt rushed even. So these pages that have the scenes where they're going through all the tests and the puzzles, it pretty much just focuses on what the test is and how they solve it, rather than providing extensive descriptions about what things look like or how the characters feel. And each of these tests usually covers about 2 to 3 pages. Like the whole chess game from when they first enter the room to when they leave the room is 3 pages long. It is a really fun section though, just seeing all of these different puzzles and how they solve them. It is a little questionable how 3 first years would be able to get past these puzzles. I guess it helps that there were 3 of them, and all 3 of them combined had the different areas of expertise that they could use together to basically function as one adult mind. I don't know. It kind of makes sense when you look at it that way. Also, something that I had a problem with was Harry does speculate in the end that Dumbledore kind of fed them the answers to be able to succeed at the tests. and that Dumbledore basically wanted Harry to have this opportunity to fight Dumbledore, which I just think is so dumb. Like the logic there is very questionable. Like, first of all, it's just so dangerous. Like, why would he encourage that? But also, if they were fed the knowledge, then all of the other students, including Slytherins, who are all apparently the devil incarnate, everyone, including Slytherins, would have the ability to break in. So I don't really see how that would help anything. And also, one of the problems with how Quirrell was able to get to the stone was because Hagrid told him about how to get past Fluffy. So Hagrid's loose lips was a really big problem. So having all of the students have this knowledge of how to get through the tests is not good. The ideal way would be to make it as top secret as possible, not to feed answers to the students. So just none of that really made sense to me at all. Okay, so for the Devil's Snare, it wasn't a huge deal or anything, but it's just something that I wanted to talk about because this was something that was pretty different from the movie, I think. I like the movie version better because the movie had two elements to the test where you could relax and sink down and then move on. But obviously, Ron doesn't relax, so then they have to think of another way to get him out. But in the book, the only way to get out of it is to light a fire, which is also slightly different in the movie. In the movie, it's light versus the book, it's fire. So I liked that the movie had multiple different ways for them to think their way out of this problem, and also there's this urgency that Ron is panicking, and it just lends to this pressure and this urgency and anxiety of the test and the danger. But also, the poem in the book doesn't really make sense. You can probably say it's not supposed to be a poem since it's not in stanzas, but the way they talk about it, it sounds like it's supposed to be a common phrase, like a poem, or just something that rolls off the tongue. So this is the phrase that they say in the book. Devil's snare, devil's snare. It likes the dark and the damp, so light a fire. That does not rhyme. That doesn't sound good at all. Devil's snare, devil's snare. It likes the dark and the damp, so light a fire. That doesn't rhyme. It's so weird. And the movie version makes a lot more sense because they make it rhyme.
Devil snare. It's deadly fun, but we'll sulk in the sun.
Makes a lot more sense that way. One line that I thought was just really funny was this line. Harry's talking and he says, I might be able to hold Snape off for a while, but I'm no match for him, really. I just thought that scene was so funny because Harry thinking he could even take Snape on for a second is just so funny to me. Like, okay, first year, okay. Another thing I wanted to follow up on is something that I'm sure is going to be consistently brought up as I read the next 6 books about the Sorting Hat and the houses. There's this line where Hermione kind of describes herself. So it starts with Harry. I'm not as good as you, said Harry, very embarrassed as she let go of him. Me, said Hermione. Books and cleverness. There are more important things. Friendship and bravery and... Oh, Harry, be careful. So that was just kind of another thing that I zoned in on was Hermione describing herself as smart, books and cleverness. Like, even she herself describes herself as smart. So it's just another thing that's like, she really should just be in Ravenclaw. It doesn't really make sense that she's in Gryffindor. Also, something that I picked up on was some retconning, even like within the same book. So if you remember, there was this scene where Quirrell is talking with Snape in the forest, and it basically sounds like Snape is threatening Quirrell into telling him the answers to the trial to get to the stone. And in the end, Quirrell says that was just Snape saying that he was on to Quirrell and he was trying to see how far Quirrell had gotten. And I mean, that just doesn't make any sense in any way. If Snape knew that Quirrell was trying to break in and get the stone, why didn't Snape do anything? He didn't tell Dumbledore, he didn't try to stop him, he just did like a little threat. He just casually wanted to know how far he was in the puzzle. It doesn't make any sense. The conversation in the forest, it's basically just a warning. The conversation ends with Snape saying, "We'll see where your loyalties lie." Like, obviously it's set up for you to think that Snape is the one that's breaking into to get the stone, but I don't really see it working any other way than that. And they try to kind of retcon it in the end and be like, oh no, Snape was a good guy at the end. See, but it doesn't really add up to me. Also, in the end, when Quirrell is talking to Harry and he's revealing all of his plans and what happened, he doesn't have his stutter anymore because the stutter was all an act. But if you go back and look at the scene that was in the forest, Quirrell still has his stutter. So if Snape was on to Quirrell at that time, wouldn't Quirrell have just dropped that stutter? Also, I don't exactly remember what happens, but later on in the books, isn't there some kind of storyline where Snape is kind of a double agent where he's like working with Voldemort and Voldemort thinks he's on his side, but actually Snape is on Harry's side. So it doesn't make sense here if Voldemort / Quirrell are against Snape and they know that Snape is helping Harry. It doesn't make sense for later books either. Also, how did Quirrell even get this job? Did they not have to do any kind of background check before hiring random teachers? It's so sketch. Also, I had some logic issues with this last quarter of the book. Like, it's a magical world, so it's kind of hard to talk about, but it gets ridiculous at a certain point. Like, one thing that it never made sense to me was how Harry gets the stone out of the mirror. It makes sense that Harry wants the stone for the stone itself versus wanting it for eternal life or for getting rich. That all makes sense. So Harry would be able to see himself actually getting the stone versus seeing him with eternal life and seeing himself with a bunch of riches around him. Hopefully that makes sense. But so that all makes sense, but the way that the stone actually gets in his pocket from that, like, how does the stone actually teleport into his pocket? I don't really get that. But the one thing that always got me, I never understood it, is how he's able to burn Quirrell. And Dumbledore says at the end, it's basically like with the power of love that he's able to burn Quirrell. That just makes no sense. I'm sorry. Like, I get it as a metaphor. It's saying like, oh, with the love of someone, of your family, you'll be able to do anything. Even if they're gone, their love will always be with you. Like, I get it as a metaphor, but him actually being able to burn Quirrell with the power of love just makes no sense. I'm sorry. Okay, and then one last thing for this section specifically is Dumbledore giving just enough points for Gryffindor to beat Slytherin. It's so petty. Again, it's just kind of blatant favoritism a little bit. He gives just enough points for them to beat Slytherin. And he does it in this like really dramatic way where he basically already gave the prize to Slytherin and then he's like, oh, never mind. We have some extra points to give out. And then just swaps out all of the flags and the colors everywhere. Like, ha ha. It's so petty and mean. But I did always love that Neville gets those extra like 10 points just to set them over the edge. Like, I just love that Neville gets that reward and attention and love. So that's it for the last quarter discussion, but I'm not done yet because I want to talk about kind of my overall thoughts about the whole book, because I've been talking kind of about specific points here and there, specific quotes, things that I've liked or disliked along the way, and now I kind of want to take a bigger picture look at the book. So one thing that's been a consistent talking point throughout this whole vlog is reading the book versus just watching the movie. And for me, The book is so similar to the movie that there is virtually no point to reading this book. And I think one reason for that is that the book focuses so much on plot that the movie is able to use all of those important elements since it's pretty much just plot. The book doesn't really have much deeper stuff that's covered. It doesn't really go into details about characters or relationships or inner thoughts and dialogue. It's very plot centered. So the movie is able to use all of those plot elements while adding music and aesthetic and visuals and costumes that all help the atmosphere of the story, because I felt that that was something that was neglected a little bit in the book. But it is impressive that the book translates to the movie version so well. The book is around 8 hours long, and the movie is 2.5 hours long, and there were very few things from the book that didn't make it into the movie. So I just think it's pretty crazy that they were able to stay so faithful to the book. Another impressive thing about the book is it is a children's book, but I do think it's just as interesting for adults as it is for children. So that is kind of impressive that it's able to keep both demographics' attention, I would guess. But so one big thing I noticed in this book is that it focuses so much on the plot. Plot is definitely the strongest part of the book. It's just banger after banger. It's the Dursleys, it's the vanishing glass, it's the letters coming through the fireplace, it's Hagrid taking him away to Diagon Alley, and then Hogwarts, and then classes, and then Quidditch, and it's just one thing after the next that you would never get bored. For me, though, it does get a little bit boring because I already know all of the plot. And the one thing that this book has to offer is the plot. So it is a little bit boring for me. That's why I would prefer the movies. But if it's your first time reading it, then obviously it's, banger after banger. There's so many things happening. But because the plot is focused on so much, there's a lot of other things that definitely suffer, like character development or atmosphere or writing. Those things all suffer because plot is the focus. And as I've said, that's definitely why I think it translates so well to the movie. Like, the book gives us this dialogue and this conversation, and the movie is able to show us the conversation, but we're also getting so much more out of it. We're seeing their facial reactions, we're hearing their tone of voice and how they're saying it, we're seeing the costumes and the music, and we're able to learn more about the characters than what we learn in the books. For me, I prefer a strong plot. That's something that keeps me interested and engaged with the book, or just books in general. But for me to have a deeper connection with a book, there definitely needs to be stronger supporting elements, like the character and atmosphere. The characters are pretty surface level. This definitely suffers, again, because the plot is the focus, but also the book is just so short. There isn't really time to get into all of this other stuff. I really feel like I don't know anyone that well. Like, even Harry. I mean, there's just so many characters that it's hard to cover all of the ground. But yeah, even for characters like Harry, the main character, I still feel like I don't know him very well because it just doesn't get that deep. And that probably also just has to do with the fact that it's a children's book. But I mean, he goes through some traumatic events, but there's never really much introspection or any serious feelings about it. It's kind of just, oh, I'm happy now because I'm at Hogwarts. And then there's little bits here and there of him getting mad or him being cheeky. But I just didn't feel like I even got to know Harry very well. One thing that I want to talk about is, again, the sorting and the different houses, because I think this becomes really problematic when it comes to the characters. It's a really cool concept on the surface. Like, I do love the concept of sorting, and I love almost the sorority culture of it all. Like, you have your group of sisters or brothers or whatever that you you do everything with. You eat with them, you live with them, you do your classes with them, and they become your family. And also it's kind of like a sports team also, like you have your team mascot and the colors. If you can't tell, I'm a Ravenclaw. So I do really love that whole concept, but it does become problematic when you look at how that impacts the characters, because first of all, it's sorting people into categories at such an early age. They're, I think, 11 when they get sorted. So it's kind of pigeonholing people into 1 to 2 characteristics. And also, like, what does that do to your development? Are you supposed to stay the same as you grow older? When you get kind of categorized into these boxes so early on, it doesn't really give you a chance to explore other things with your identity. Also, it's just not good that they're sorting 11-year-old kids into good or bad houses. They group all Slytherins together as being all literally evil. Like, that's so messed up. These 11-year-old kids, you're gonna say that they're evil? I mean, just the fact that you're calling them evil is going to make them evil because you already expect that out of them, so why not just give in and be evil at that point? Also, there's just this hierarchy or elitism, which is why everyone wants to be in Gryffindor. There's just a clear bias in the storytelling and also just in the world because Dumbledore and Hagrid and all these authority figures always say that Slytherin is evil and Gryffindor is the best. So it's not just that there's good and bad houses, it's also there's a ranking. It's Gryffindor's the best, and then I'd say maybe Ravenclaw is second best because a few times like Ron says like, "Oh, it wouldn't be too bad if I got Ravenclaw." There's kind of lines like that. So I think Ravenclaw is second best, and then Hufflepuff is almost last, and then Slytherin is obviously no one wants that one. This whole concept of sorting, it also just doesn't make sense for the narrative because Harry's a Gryffindor, so he's going to be interacting mostly with Gryffindors, but it would be boring if they were all the same character. It wouldn't really make sense if they were all these carbon copies of each other. And that's where it becomes problematic because in a normal story, you'll have the jock, you'll have the brains, the geek, you'll have the shallow person, you'll have the friendly person. There's all these different archetypes that there usually are in stories. So in this story, we have the main group. We have Harry, who's the main one. He's the brave one. And then Ron, who's kind of a doofus a little bit. He's maybe a little bit sassier. And then you have Hermione, who's the brains. And then you have Neville, who's kind of the goody two-shoes, nerd kind of character. So it's kind of fulfilling the normal archetypes that you usually have in stories, but yet they're all Gryffindors. So it doesn't really make sense. Like, would Neville really be a Gryffindor? Would Hermione really be a Gryffindor? Probably not. Another thing I wanted to talk about was Harry's optimism, I guess is what I would call it. It's something that I think is really important to the books. And there's definitely 2 ways of looking at it. I think reading it at my age, I definitely had a little bit of a pessimistic look at Harry's character and just seeing him be favored, and some of the stuff he does or some of the stuff he says comes off as entitled or ignorant. Like, why does he always think he can get away with things? Why does he think that everything is going to turn out well for him? So that's definitely one way of looking at it, is through, Harry being kind of entitled and privileged. But the whole book feels atmospheric through Harry's perspective, if that makes sense. Harry always just thinking that he can take anything on, nothing bad can happen, he's unstoppable. At times it's like, you're so dumb. Like, you think you can take on Snape and Voldemort and you're 11 years old, you're a first year. You really think you can take them on? Like, it is ignorant and entitled, but it is very accurate to youth and just thinking that you're special and that nothing bad can ever happen to you. And it does work out for Harry every time, too. He lives and he's successful and all of that. So it does have this kind of warm, fuzzy feeling of this perfect world where you're special and everything works out for you. And I do feel like that was intentional. So bringing it back to specific characters, there were a very limited amount of times where characters specifically were interesting or caught my attention. Fred and George, Mrs. Weasley, and Hagrid were the standouts for me, but it was very limited points where that happened. Fred and George were really entertaining when we first met them, and then we kind of hear about them, but don't really hear directly from them as we go on. Mrs. Weasley, again, we just see in that beginning train station scene. So there was just a very few times that I specifically thought, like, oh, I really like this character and what they're bringing to the table. Other than that, it was kind of very surface level from the characters. Also, there was just very limited interactions with the antagonists, specifically Quirrell and Voldemort. I definitely would have liked to see more of that. Logic was also something that held me up at times. Again, it's hard to talk about a little bit because it is a book about magic and it is a children's book, so where do you draw the line? And that's definitely going to be subjective, but at some point for me, it's like, well, even though this is a magical world, it still isn't really making sense. Again, like I mentioned, the getting the stone out of the mirror and burning Quirrell with the power of love. And also there's just other logistical things, like why does Dumbledore keep Hagrid there? Like, again, I love him, but he is a liability. He should not be at Hogwarts. Or why did Quirrell not have some kind of background check? It's stuff like that where it's just the logistics aren't making sense either. But that's it. Those are my thoughts on the first book. I'm definitely excited to move on with the series, especially once we get more into probably like the fourth book. I feel like that's when it maybe starts to get more mature. So I'm excited to get into those ones. So, I mean, that's it. Let me know your thoughts on the first book, on any of the things I pointed out. Did you have some of the same problems? Am I missing something? Let me know. So that's it for my recap or my reading vlog journey for the first Harry Potter book. I'll definitely be recapping and checking in for my journey reading through the second Harry Potter book, so I'll see you then. Bye!